He looks well-groomed, a suit, a charming smile, hair perfectly slicked back. On his dating profile, everything seems just right. His name? BV. A man like many women might see on platforms such as Bumble. Successful, sophisticated, maybe even a little mysterious. According to media reports, BV appeared on dating apps again after his release from prison. A polished profile, a smile that inspires trust and hides a past too dark to imagine. Because behind that photo lies a truth so disturbing, it's almost impossible to believe. This man, who today may walk through Zurich, drink coffee, send messages, once brutally killed a close friend. What began as a night of partying ended in a scene so horrific that even seasoned investigators were left speechless. A violent act so cruel it shocked all of Switzerland. A crime that didn't happen in the shadows of society, but in one of the country's wealthiest areas. On Zurich's so-called Gold Coast, where villas shine, the lake sparkles, and people believe they are safe. This is the story of a young man who had everything and lost it all. The story of a friendship destroyed in a haze of drugs and delusion. And the story of a killer who returned to a world that thought it had long forgotten him. It's 2014, Switzerland, Zurich, a city that, for many, stands as a symbol of safety, order, and wealth. But even here, where the lake sparkles, where everything feels clean, quiet, and controlled, there are depths of darkness few could ever imagine. Zurich lies still in the cold of winter. Drive along the left bank of Lake Zurich, and you reach what locals call the Gold Coast, a place where villas shimmer in the sun, and luxury is simply part of daily life. Here lives the family of BV, 24 years old at the time, the son of wealthy parents raised in privilege, yet torn inside by addiction, pressure, and self-doubt. Just a few kilometers away lives Alex M., 23, originally from Britain. He's full of life, open, curious, the kind of person who lights up a room. Zurich for him is a city of opportunity, new friends, new experiences, freedom. One of those friends is BV. The two become inseparable. Brothers in spirit, bound by parties, long nights of music, drugs, and the intoxicating feeling of being untouchable. But on the night of December 29th, 2014, that friendship will come to a tragic end. What begins as a carefree night among friends will, in the early hours, turn into something no one can comprehend. An eruption of anger, drugs, and violence. And it happens not in some dark alleyway, but inside a villa on the Gold Coast, one of the safest and wealthiest places in all of Switzerland. A young man will die that night, and another will lose his life, not by death, but by what he did. The victim's name was Alex M. He was 23 years old and originally from the United Kingdom. For some time, he had been living in Zurich, a city that fascinated him. He loved its vibrant energy, its music scene, its nightlife, and he quickly found his place there. Alex was full of life, charming, open, always surrounded by friends. Those who knew him described him as funny, kind, and the kind of person who could win anyone's heart. Among his closest friends was BV, the man who would later become his killer. Their friendship went back years. They met often, went out together, partied, and trusted each other completely. In their circle, drugs were nothing unusual. Cocaine, ketamine, alcohol, the kinds of things that, in those scenes, almost felt normal. But no one could have imagined that this exact mix would one day lead to disaster. Alex lived in Zurich, but he was often on the move, sometimes staying with friends, sometimes traveling. On that December night in 2014, he just wanted to celebrate. Together with BV and a group of friends, he spent the evening in an apartment in Zurich. A night filled with music, laughter, and drugs. A night like so many before. As dawn approached, Alex decided to stay over at BV's place. The two took a taxi to the family's villa, a luxurious home on Zurich's Gold Coast in the quiet town of Küsnacht. What Alex couldn't have known was that this would be his final ride. Just a few hours later, he was dead, killed by a man he had once called his friend. The perpetrator, known in the media only as BV, was no stranger. He came from a good family, growing up in a wealthy household in Zurich, a world where money was never an issue, but pressure and expectations were high. From an early age, he was seen as intelligent, ambitious, and charming. At first glance, he appeared to have his life under control, well-groomed, well-dressed, always composed. But behind that facade, things looked very different. BV had struggled for years with mental health issues and drug addiction. He began using drugs at a young age, at first occasionally, later habitually. Ketamine and cocaine in particular became constant companions. Friends later described him as two different people, calm and kind when sober, unpredictable and impulsive when under the influence. His parents were aware of his problems. Several attempts at rehab failed, and therapy brought no lasting improvement. Still, BV continued to move in the same party circles. And it was there that he repeatedly crossed paths with Alex M., his close friend. The two shared a complicated friendship. They partied together, used drugs together, supported each other. Yet at the same time, they both spiraled deeper into a vortex of drugs, excess, and self-destruction. While Alex was known as lively and cheerful, BV became increasingly torn apart inside. He craved control, but the drugs took precisely that from him. In the weeks leading up to the crime, experts later described his condition as increasingly unstable. BV was consuming excessive amounts of cocaine and ketamine, was emotionally volatile, and had lost touch with reality. He himself later claimed he could barely remember what had actually happened that night. Outwardly, none of this was visible. In photos, he posed in a suit, smiling, well-groomed, confident, the picture of a man who had it all. But in truth, he was already a prisoner of his addiction. And so, on the morning of December 30th, 2014, in his parents' villa, an argument escalated. An argument from which BV would emerge not as a friend, but as a murderer. During the night of December 29th to 30th, 2014, BV spent the evening in Zurich with friends, including his longtime friend Alex. Both had taken drugs. In the early morning hours, they took a taxi to BV's parents' house on the Gold Coast, where they continued using drugs. The following information comes from a publicly available court document, which describes in detail what happened on the night of the killing. Between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m., an argument broke out, partly over the loud music, and partly because BV suddenly wanted them to stop taking drugs. During the altercation, Alex pushed BV and shoved him against a glass table. BV responded with extreme violence. He repeatedly punched Alex in the face and then attacked him with several heavy objects, including a candlestick about 4 feet tall and weighing roughly 13 pounds, a sculpture weighing about 4 pounds, and an antique figurine weighing about 1 pound. He struck Alex multiple times on the head and upper body, causing skull fractures and extensive injuries. Finally, the accused strangled his victim and inserted a candle roughly 12 inches long, about 4 inches deep into his throat, blocking the airways. Alex suffocated as a result of the strangulation and airway obstruction. Blood loss, head trauma, and asphyxiation caused by vomit may also have contributed to his death. BV himself sustained almost no injuries and did not deny the killing, but admitted to it. When police arrived at the villa in Küsnacht on the morning of December 30th, 2014, They were met with a scene of unimaginable violence. Bloodstains covered the room, objects were shattered, and in the middle of the living room lay the lifeless body of Alex. BV himself opened the door. He appeared confused, almost apathetic, and was still under the influence of drugs. To the officers, he simply said, "I killed him." Forensic teams worked for hours. It soon became clear that this was not a planned murder, but a crime born out of a sudden, uncontrolled outburst of violence. The medical examiners determined that Alex had died not only from blunt force trauma, but also from severe strangulation and the insertion of a candle into his airways, a detail that shocked even experienced investigators. Toxicology tests on the suspect's blood showed the presence of cocaine and alcohol. But ketamine could no longer be clearly detected. Because the blood sample had been taken several hours after the crime, experts concluded that BV had been heavily intoxicated during the attack. Witnesses later confirmed that both men had taken massive amounts of ketamine earlier that night. Further toxicological reports and hair analyses revealed that BV had been addicted to drugs for years, particularly ketamine and cocaine. Multiple attempts at rehab and inpatient treatment had failed to bring lasting improvement. Over the years, his mental state had deteriorated. Experts described him as emotionally unstable, with significantly impaired self-control on the night of the crime. In court, BV admitted to the killing. He spoke of an argument, of fear, of a moment when he was no longer himself. In 2017, the District Court of Milan sentenced him to 12.5 years in prison for intentional homicide and sexual assault, taking into account his diminished responsibility. Later, the Zurich High Court ordered an additional inpatient therapeutic measure, treatment for his long-term drug addiction and personality disorders. In 2023, the Swiss Federal Supreme Court upheld the verdict. BV remains convicted, but in need of therapy. The case went down as one of the most brutal acts of violence in Zurich's recent legal history. Today, BV lives as a free man. After several years in prison and mandatory therapy, he was released. He served his sentence. The files are closed, but the debate continues. Because instead of living quietly in the shadows, BV returned to public life. He appeared on social media and even on dating platforms like Bumble. The women who chatted with him had no idea about his past. Only when the media broke the story did it become clear who was really behind that charming profile. The suit, the slicked back hair, a convicted murderer. For many, it was a shock. Can someone who committed such a brutal crime just become part of everyday life again? The justice system says yes. If therapy was successful and experts see no ongoing danger, then even a convicted killer has the right to start over. But the question remains, how far should rehabilitation go? Should someone who once took a life be allowed to date again? To work? To move freely? To live among us? Maybe even right next door? And now I want to ask you, what do you think? Does someone who committed a crime like this deserve a second chance? The case of BV is more than just a crime story. It shows how thin the line can be between friendship and violence, between intoxication and reality, between guilt and a second chance. A young man lost his life, senselessly, brutally, at the hands of a friend. The perpetrator has served his sentence, but the traces of that night remain. In the families, in the court files, and in the conscience of a society torn between justice and forgiveness. Because in the end, only one question remains. Can we ever truly forget what happened? Or must we learn to live with the knowledge that some of the darkest depths begin right next to us?